Welcome everybody to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends. Today we are in sunny, lovely, beautiful Miami, as we are all week. I was down here for the PBD podcast. We brought the whole family along. We had a little bit of a vacation, as much of a vacation as we'd ever do, I guess, because we're still doing our show.
We're still working, but
yeah,
that's just how we roll.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to be talking to, or Crystal is going to be talking to Teray today. Because, Teray has a new book out, which is a very interesting book that Crystal, dove into. And also, he's going to open up on other topics too. We're going to talk some politics, all around fun.
Absolutely. So the book is The Ivy League Counterfeiter. And it is a true story that is, it really reads like a sort of made for Hollywood script. But it actually is a true story about someone that Teray knew, that he went to high school with, who had this whole sort of perfect path laid out for him. He got a scholarship to one of the top prep schools in the country. That's where Teray met him, at his high school. Then he goes on to Columbia University, this Ivy League institution. He's highly intelligent, he's charming, he's charismatic. But he discovers at Columbia this super high-end printer. His buddy works at a print shop, and he discovers this high-end printer. And he takes a dollar bill and he copies it, and it comes out so perfectly. He's sort of, in the book, Teray describes him as instantly knowing what he's going to do. And so he sort of puts aside this whole perfect storybook path to elite status that's laid out for him, and instead can't leave this life of crime. And it's fascinating. Just the personal story is fascinating. Some of the meta narratives are fascinating. And then I also want to talk to Teray about some of the things he's been observing this year. He's a great sort of cultural critic and observer. So I'm curious his thoughts on Kanye West, who he's been a long time fan of, and has had a lot of interest in, and all the various different 2022 artist scandals. So we'll deal with all of that.
Counterfeiting money is an interesting crime,
right?
Yeah, it's a very unique crime. It's on the one hand, you're committing a kind of a terrible act by making fake money,
right?
Because whoever you pass it on to, it's fake. Maybe people figure out it's fake, they can get arrested for using fake money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also, technically, it's nonviolent, right? But I have an issue with the whole nonviolent versus violent breakdown in crimes anyway, because when you look at Wall Street and what they did and kicked millions of people out of their homes with these predatory loans, and even though that's technically nonviolent, it's actually, in a sense, it's even more violent than somebody who robs a convenience store.
Well,
right?
and that's the part that's interesting to me about this guy, the protagonist, whose name is Cliff. He was basically on the path to be one of those type of criminals, the type that's officially sanctioned, Wall Street type of criminals. Yeah. And instead he goes in.
I'll go one step further.
Right.
Yeah.
And, Teray talks to a bunch of actual counterfeiters too, for the, to inform the narrative of
I like how there's a community of them.
Yeah.
Have you talked to Bob? Bob's an expert at putting the little zeros on there.
Right. Well, and what they say is, they view it as sort of getting one over on the system. They see it as, this is the way they rationalize it.
Yeah, but
but it also reminded me of the whole crypto boom, because it's almost the same type of crime. You're creating fake money. It's just the crypto dudes had it a sort of grander ambition around it ultimately. So there was a lot there in the story that's very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lesson in there somewhere, right? About how I think probably all criminals, or the overwhelming majority of criminals, kind of rationalize their crimes and think it's for some higher purpose. You know what I mean? And in some cases it is. If you're stealing medicine from the pharmacy so that your kid survives, you know what? God bless.
Yeah.
But, I think every criminal, no matter how depraved, except maybe a tiny percentage, kind of thinks, rationalizes, justifies, no, I'm definitely doing the right thing for reasons X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Well, this guy, as you read the story, the way he has to launder this cash is by basically screwing over cab drivers, small business owners, club owners.
Dark.
So the idea that this is, getting one over on the system, or that this is a victimless crime, is just not true.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the airlines. I know we had some personal experience with this. The podcast I did, the PBD podcast, the main host, his flight was canceled.
Ugh.
Leaving Colorado, and he had to, the next day or whatever. I don't think he was on Southwest, no, but his flight still was canceled. So it's not even just Southwest.
Yeah.
It's a majority Southwest, but it's not just Southwest.
Right.
Yeah, the whole airline system is fucked up. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so obviously there were these huge storms in, much of the country, but especially in the Northeast, in Buffalo. And so inevitable that there's going to be some airline chaos, especially around the holidays, et cetera. But Southwest, it turns out, was using this incredibly antiquated system. And their catastrophe was so complete that still, we're recording this on Thursday, they're still canceling thousands of flights every day. And they basically told these, stranded travelers there with kids and old people and whatever, like, sorry, we just don't even have flights. We're canceling so many flights. We just don't even really have flights for you to rebook. Baggage claim areas are overwhelmed with passenger luggage that was on the plane, went to some other destination. People are, have no idea where their stuff is at this point. Southwest is unable to handle it. I read the statement from the flight attendant union for Southwest, and they talked about how they have been warning about how these systems need to be upgraded. And many of them, the flight attendants who, by the way, the service worker, the people that are dealing with the tickets, the customers are like, this is not their fault. And I'm sure they're dealing with the brunt of all kinds of anger and rage, justifiable rage, but, aimed ultimately at the wrong people. Flight attendants stranded all around the country. Company has no idea where they are. That's part of the reason why all these flights have had to be canceled, is because they weren't able to keep track of their own crew. They have some, again, totally antiquated system where they have to call in and report to Southwest where they ultimately are. They're dependent on the company to be able to get hotel rooms and food. And so people, their own employees also stranded all over the country. So total, utter catastrophe in every single way. And oh, by the way, it's not like this isn't a company that can't afford to make their passengers and their customers whole after this whole totally nightmarish holiday experience, because they're out giving hundreds of millions of dollars in dividends to, top 1% shareholders. It's just totally classic.
So hold on, can I interject?
Yes, go ahead.
So it's an antiquated old system that they never updated in terms of how people check into work and check out of work and get their hotel rooms and all that stuff.
But also the actual booking of the flights, the keeping track of where the planes are, the whole thing that they use, their entire back-end operation basically just completely failed them in this situation.
Okay.
And again, it was predictable. The workers have been warning that this was a problem that they needed to upgrade. And rather than investing that money in having a system that actually functions in a challenging circumstance, instead they gave, their shareholders millions of dollars.
Does some of this have to do with the thing that we've read previously too, which is they will overbook like crazy and then people show up and it's we don't have a plane, we don't have a pilot, we don't have anything.
Possible. That part I'm not sure about. I haven't seen reporting on that specifically yet.
And then also, have you seen anything about sickness in regard to the flight attendants, the pilots? Because, I read all the time about this whole triple-demic thing that's floating around where people have RSV, croup, COVID, the flu, and...
I think the biggest triggering effect was these storms that halted air travel. I mean, the Buffalo airport was shut down for days. But, that whole region of the country, this was a massive storm. And every airline was going to struggle with dealing with that. And, that's something you expect, but some weather delays are inevitable. But because you had this confluence of huge amounts of demand and massive amounts of customers trying to travel, some of the heaviest travel days of the entire year, with the storm, when you layer on top of that a system that wasn't able to handle it, I think those were the three factors that really caused this entire catastrophe.
Okay. So now tell me about Mayor Pete.
So now, our wonderful Department of Transportation Secretary, Mayor Pete, who, by the way, asked for this job. He wanted this job because he thought it would be very high profile, and ultimately...
He said, I love planes. I love trains.
It's very Trumpy.
And I love planes. It's more like a toddler type thing to say.
I mean,
Mom, I love trains.
Remember when Biden mocked him for not knowing anything about transportation and infrastructure when they were running against each other?
Yes.
And then he did that whole ad where he was like, oh, Mayor Pete put some lights on a bridge. Wow, isn't that amazing?
I do remember that, yeah. Like, oh, this is your executive experience, bitch.
Then he's like, how about we put you in charge of the entire infrastructure system at a time when we have like mass supply chain crisis. We had, potential railroad strike, and we've had airline chaos prior to this event. Okay, so Mayor Pete is in there with no real experience or demonstrated interest in this job. And I think I also saw that he has been like on vacation during this time as well.
No.
Well, it turns out he had just recently gone on a late show with James Corden, whatever.
Come on.
And said, airline travel is, quote, going to get better by the holidays. We're really pressing the airlines to deliver better service. Our friend David Sirota at The Lever, Breaking Point's partner, he has the scoop that Republican and Democratic attorneys general have been sending letters begging Pete and the Department of Transportation to do something to hold these airlines to account. Pete will go on, these cable news shows, we're getting tough and we're going to have these enforcement actions and we're going to fine these airlines, whatever. So far, Pete's Department of Transportation has yet to fine any U.S. airline a single dollar for unpaid refunds, flight cancellations, or systematic violations of consumer protection law, issued fewer enforcement orders in 2021 than in any year of the Trump or Obama administrations.
Yeah, let me interject real quick, because I remember reading when we were having similar issues not too long ago, I remember reading an article where people pointed out, even Obama, he was dealing with this issue of like people. I think it was people waiting for really long amounts of time on the tarmac.
Yeah,
and they either threatened to fine or actually fined the airlines, and then they like whipped their shit in order very quickly.
Yes.
So even Obama was like, leading the charge way better than this.
And David Dayen over at The Prospect, who always does invaluable work, a while back, they published a great breakdown of the specific powers Pete could use, the type of penalties they could impose.
Guy's great. I love his reporting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, I don't know if you remember this. He proposed huge fines when flights are canceled and when there's delays. And instead they've done literally nothing. Pete has just, made the like cable news show circuit and the late show with James Corden circuit, apparently, to just like out of nowhere pledge, I'm sure things are going to ultimately get better. And here's the specifics. 38 state attorneys general wrote to congressional leaders declaring Pete's agency failed to respond and to provide appropriate recourse to thousands of consumer complaints about airlines' customer service. So basically, he was asleep at the switch.
He's not doing anything.
Not doing anything.
Yeah.
And again, he thought the reason he wanted this job, because they had originally proposed for him to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget, which a job he also has no real qualification for, but and ultimately actually very powerful job as well. He didn't want it because he didn't think it was glamorous or high profile enough for his future political ambitions. I mean, literally. And so he thought, Department of Transportation, okay, we're going to pass this infrastructure package. I can fly around the country. I can go to ribbon cutting ceremonies, and it'll be all just like fun and games and help to build my political profile. Instead, it turns out this position
very important
actually matters, is really important, needs someone who takes it seriously. And, it's disgusting that the Biden administration, which is not different from other administrations, but it's disgusting that they put this dude in charge of this agency just out of sheer sort of corrupt political patronage because, Pete got this chit because he dropped down to the primary at the right time and fell in line. And so he got to name his price. And this is ultimately, the American airline traveler is the one who pays.
I hate these people so much. I hate to say I hate them so much. I hate them. I hate them. That's my commentary.
Our friend Irami made this point to me that I think is really well said, which is like, if you looked at a developing world nation, poorer country where they have these sort of like clear nepotistic political patronage where it's like the nephew or the brother ends up in charge of the like important agency. You'd see it so clearly for what it is, but that's literally the exact same thing that happened here ultimately.
Oh yeah.
This dude has no business in this job whatsoever and no interest in the job, clearly.
Oh yeah, I mean, nepotism, corruption, pay to play, like all this stuff it's in our faces, but they put a little veneer of respectability over it because it's like they wear suits and ties and they're all part of the club and they pretend it's like merit based. It's like, this isn't fucking merit based. Are you kidding me?
Please.
This guy was the mayor of a city that has like fewer people in it then Breaking Points has employees, right? Like, oh, wow. Congrats, you fixed a pothole. That was your big fucking accomplishment.
Well, he wasn't even that good of a mayor.
I know.
Like, the town was like revolting against him during his primary campaign, and like the media didn't bother to cover it outside of a few independent reporters.
It's all vanity.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.